Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. Have you ever eaten Indian food? Of course you've eaten Indian food, but what about a thali? So what is a thali? A thali is a round kind of plate. It's usually made of stainless steel, and then it has very small circular containers within that plate. So if you look up the internet and you search for the word thali, which is Thali, you'll quickly see what it looks like. What's particularly interesting about this method of serving food is that there are 4 variations in that thali. So you will get spicy, salty, sour, and sweet, and it's in the same meal. And the reason for this is, of course, it's good for digestion and it's good for your health, but primarily it is to create contrast. And this is the kind of thing that you're looking for when you're creating your articles or your podcast or anything. You're always looking to create contrast because contrast gets the listener, the viewer to pay attention. In podcasts, you can have volume contrast. You can go faster or slower. And yet, in an article, you have to be different. You still have to have the contrast. How do you have contrast in articles? That's what this podcast is all about. Enjoy. A friend wrote to me today and asked me what seemed like a pretty straightforward question. She expected a response of about 5 lines, maybe 6. Instead, I ended up with over 2,500 words. So what was her question? It was, what traits do you consider to be the hallmarks of quality in a piece of content? The answer is something that most writers may not want to hear. It's an answer that demands sacrifice, going against the grain, and being persistent when things are going horribly wrong. Still interested? Well, here goes. So, what is a piece of content that enriches us so deeply? What is it that makes us believe we're in the mystical land of Hogwarts? I'd say there are 3 points: contrast, lack of pandering, and the gap between style and ability. Let's start with contrast. It's the year 1986. John Heritage and David Greatbatch have an itch to scratch. They're studying applause and what causes it. So they embark on what could be considered one of the most boring tasks in the world. They analyze politicians' speeches. 476 of them. And what were these 2 poor souls looking for? Applause. That's what they were keen to find. Why was it that one speech received total silence while the other speeches got applause? But not just applause, but applause twice per minute. 19,000 sentences later, they had a clue. It was contrast. The brain was no longer dormant. Contrast brought a smile to their faces and cheering followed. Contrast requires you and me to work so much harder. But contrast also puts you in a strange and precarious position. If everyone says, you should go this way, and there is a writer that says, no, you're headed into sheepland, this is the way to go. Now, that is going out on a limb. Contrast is scary. It's much easier to say what everyone else is saying. If you want to start with the hallmark of quality, contrast is where you start. Let's take an example of contrast. Let's say you're writing about a subject such as productivity, for example. Now, productivity doesn't bring to mind any sort of rest or sleep, does it? Instead, the enduring message of productivity has almost always been one of focus and concentration. It's always been one of working out astounding efficiencies to do more work than ever before. At this point in time, let's say your article talks about sleep. It talks about taking the weekends off. It even goes on to suggest that you take several months off every year. You've shaken up the force a bit, haven't you? You've created a counterforce that at first might seem impossible to defend. Yet that's what great writing is about. Conceptually, it stands out and picks a topic that's contrarian. But not all topics need to be contrarian to have that hallmark, do they? You could write articles on topics that have none of this rebellious nature and still bring out the big guns. This calls for a bit of roller coaster in your writing. An article needs to have a flow so the reader can move forward, but just as important is a counterflow. Flow by itself is super boring. Try this paragraph, for example. We went to the airport. There was no traffic on the highway. Got through check-in and immigration in next to no time. Then we sat down to have a beer. So what are you thinking at this point in time? I'll tell you what, you're wondering if the story has any purpose. And yet, the moment counterflow comes into play, you're alert again. Let's go back to the story. You've had your beer when a police officer walks up with a grim face. That's drama. That's contrast. And the hallmark of an excellent article is the ability to insert contrast into various sections of your article. Counterflow needs to head back to flow, however. Too much counterflow and your reader is turned off. The grim police officer, the spilling of the beer on your white shirt, the missing of the flight, and the article seems to be falling right out of the skies. Which is why contrast matters so much. Contrast is a constantly evolving set of words that get you to slip-slide through, yes, like a roller coaster. Up, and down. But contrast is only one hallmark of good writing. The second is the lack of pandering. Clients often ask me if I write articles with keywords in mind. The answer is no. I never have, and I've been told I can get 10 times the traffic if I pander to keywords, but frankly, I don't care. The moment you pander, you're not really writing for yourself. Most of the greatest writing is not done for another. Most outstanding writing is done to clear the cobwebs from your mind. You know this feeling well if you've tried to do a bit of a project like writing a report or a presentation or a book. There are a million thoughts floating through your mind and none of them seem to sit well until you put them down on paper. The reason why I wrote a book on the secret life of testimonials wasn't because a client asked me to do so. I wrote it because I had these floating ideas in my head. And when I started writing the book, I expected to complete between 20 to 30 pages. Now, there was a good reason for me to have this pagination estimate. I'd already written a book on testimonials earlier, and the first edition stopped quite firmly at 30 pages. Imagine my surprise when I went past 30 onto 40 and then over 75, sailed past 100 before settling in 125 pages. When you pander, you lose your soul. You stuff keywords into your headlines, write less than interesting opening paragraphs, and do things that just don't resonate with being a writer. And we know this to be true with one simple test. Would you use those same words if you were writing the article back in 1995? Pandering means a compromise that doesn't allow you to walk step by step with the best possible work. No one is saying that you have to be this crazy, independent soul forever. All of us end up pandering in some shape or form. The great artist and sculptor Leonardo da Vinci was known to be a lover of nature. He hated war, and yet he created some of the most destructive weapons of his time. And his patron, Cesare Borgia, was one of the most hated men in all of Italy. Pandering, at some level, is almost inevitable. Yet, Leonardo didn't stay in Panderland forever. He moved on. He created work that was enduring, and mostly for himself. He didn't want or expect you to see La Gioconda, better known as the Mona Lisa. He did that for himself, to make himself happy. Galileo stopped pandering. The father of geology, a Scot named James Hutton, refused to pander. Charles Darwin wrote 400 pages of stuff that rocked our world forever. The biggest exposés, the most interesting movies, they all refuse to buckle down and pander even when they know that pandering is profitable. So where's the happy medium between doing what you love versus pandering? It's impossible to tell, but when you create a benchmark for yourself, you can decide whether you have time and the resources to create better work, or just work that's good enough. Just work that's good enough for the masses. At first, you may have no option. You've got a mortgage to pay, mouths to feed, and life is about meeting those obligations. To go down in flames before starting is not a good strategy. But then, as you get more comfortable, it's time to go out on a limb. At Psychotactics, we set a benchmark for ourselves. We wanted to work 9 months in a year and take 3 months off. Our income has been almost identical since 2007. We don't need to double our income, double our clients, or do any of that stuff that others find so endearing. This allows us not to pander. We know we can reach our goals easily and still do the projects that are exciting and rewarding. Pandering is an obstacle we all have to learn to overcome. It applies to life just as it applies to your writing. You can be enslaved by headlines like 7 ways to attract clients. You can stuff keywords into all your content to attract the search engines, but every time you do, you're running your soul on the pander grater. So that's the second hallmark of great work, the move away from Panderland. Which takes us to our third hallmark of great work. It's about the gap. We try, but we can never close the gap. When you first start writing, getting an 800-word article on paper is enough to drive you to devour a tub of ice cream. In time, however, your brain works out what needs to be done. A combination of writing, learning, resting, and confidence bubble up to the point where writing is never exactly a joy, but it's no longer a frustration. Yet when you're done with the writing, it seems to have no soul. It reads pathetically like the work you see all over the internet. And here is what Ira Glass, host of This American Life, has to say.
Nobody tells people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me, is that if you're watching this video, somebody wants to make videos, right? And all of us who do creative work, like, we get into it, and we get into it because we have good taste. Do you know what I mean? Like, you want to make TV because you love TV. You know what I mean? Because there's stuff that you just love. Okay? So you've got really good taste, and you get into this thing that I don't even know how to describe, but it's like there's a gap. That for the first couple of years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good, okay? It's not that great. It's really not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. You know what I mean? Like, you can tell that it's still sort of crappy. A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit. And the thing I would just like say to you with all my heart is that most everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through a phase of years where they had really good taste. They could tell what they were making wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. They knew it felt short. You know, and some of us can admit that to ourselves, and some of us are a little less able to admit that to ourselves. But we knew, like, it didn't have this special thing that we wanted it to have. And the thing I would say to you is everybody goes through that. And for you to go through it, if you're going through it right now, if you're just getting out of that phase, or if you're just starting off and you're entering into that phase, you got to know it's totally normal. And the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week or every month you know you're going to finish one story. You know what I mean? Whatever it's going to be. Like, you create the deadline. It's best if you have somebody who's waiting for work for you, somebody who's expecting it from you, even if it's not somebody who pays you, but that you're in a situation where you have to turn out the work. Because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions.
Ira Glass is referring to the gap in your brain. But what he doesn't say is what he and every other great writer or creator know to be true. Style is about getting worse before you get better. Your work is bad, but then it turns crappy. The reason why you give up is because you've pushed your boundaries and ended up in crappy land. And you figure out, well, if I'm just going to go from bad to worse, I might have no talent whatsoever. And you're right. Talent isn't inborn. Talent has to be acquired. It has to be nurtured. You have no talent whatsoever. And that seemingly stupid thing you just did when you pushed your boundaries, when you went outside your comfort zone, well, that just made the gap between your ability and taste so much greater. There's a reason, of course. There's a reason why your work goes downhill. The brain is stepping outside its comfort zone. When the brain steps into this frosty land, it has to do so much more, it has to read so much more, it has to experience so much more. But not just more in your own field. You have to go beyond that. You have to read about how continents were created, how birds took flight, why diamonds should logically never exist. When you read many authors, copy many authors, but also push your reading and copying way beyond your immediate field of knowledge. If you're a designer, put your design books in a safe. If you're an architect, look for books on gravity. If you're really going to learn style, you have to push up and wide at the same time. You're going to have to learn your craft, yes, but you're also going to have to get into other worlds. And there is a good reason why. Your style is an amalgamation of thoughts. You may consider your style to be unique, but every style is simply a melting pot, bubbling slowly and deliberately. A lot of style seeps in when you're reading, but there's also a factor of copying. The greatest works of our time have involved copying. Not plagiarism, but copying. And you do this to a point where you become a sort of style clone. Then, when you've had enough fill of copying one person, you copy someone else, then a third, a fourth, and a fifth. One day you wake up and you have a unique style. You know this to be true because everyone around you says so. They comment on your unique style. They say it's so different. And what they're commenting on isn't just a look, it's a culmination of your taste and your skill, a combination of the ideas of the masters that have gone before you. An amalgamation so deep that you feel the style is all your own. But you know deep down that it's come from that cavern of knowledge that's too deep to go back into. And then, just as you've reached your pinnacle of taste, you realize that you're not the guru that you aspired to be. You've climbed one mountain, and there before you lie the Himalayas of taste. You have so many mountains to climb. The gap continues to exist. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. So what's happening in psychotactics land? On the 25th of Jan, you get the access to the info products course. And if you're on the waiting list already, then you don't have to think about it. But if you want to create really good info products, not the run-of-the-mill stuff, just putting information together, but something that clients will want to read more of, get more of, that's the kind of information product that you need. Well, you have to be on the waiting list and you have to have read the brain audit. So that's the 25th of Jan. Nothing happens in February, but in March, on the 15th of March, we've got the article writing home study, which then takes us to April and the Singapore workshop on landing pages. This is being recorded in advance, so I don't know whether those seats will be taken by then. But if they aren't, then you have to go to psychotactics.com/landing pages, and that's the landing pages workshop in Singapore on the 11th, 12th, and 13th of April. And that's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now. We'll see you in 5000 BC. Still listening? One of the weirdest things that we have to do when we go away is we have to call all the restaurants in Auckland. Not all the restaurants, but the restaurants that we go to. So we go to the same restaurants on fixed days. And so we always have a table at the restaurant. And when we leave, we have to call them and cancel our bookings. Most people don't do that. Most people, when they go to a restaurant, they call the restaurant and make a booking. We have to cancel our bookings because we are regulars at these restaurants. And if we don't cancel our bookings, they don't know that we have gone away. It sounds really odd, but that's how we operate. We go there week after week. At one restaurant, we've been going for 17 years in a row on the same day, every week. So you can imagine that they expect us to be there on that date, and they have our table permanently reserved. Those are the perks, I guess, of the 3-month vacation. I hope you're having a good break, or at least a partial break as we have gone through the new year. And we'll see you soon, probably in 5000 BC. That's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now. Bye-bye.